Thank you, Adrian, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for attending tonight's lecture. We're hoping that you'll be just as thrilled to be working with us upstairs in the loft afterwards as we conduct the workshop. So, we're delighted to be invited by the University of Hawaii for the Practice of Care lecture series addressing communication. This series, once again, was created in honor of Professor Andrew Levitt as we look into his legacy of teaching on care and healthcare. We'd like to thank Dr. Lee for the notable work in the composition of this lecture series. And tonight we'll be presenting with two co-facilitators. I'll be presenting with Sophie and Simone as have been recently introduced. So, the design justice movement is rooted in acknowledging that there is an architecture, plan, and design that supports and sustains every injustice that we see. Design and protest originally began in 2015 and was founded by Brian Jr. as a design charrette during a NOAA conference. It continued in 2017 with the Delta National Day of Action. Our current iteration was started by Brian Jr., David Howley, and Dean Coles. We had our first national call in June of 2020, and after the murder of George Floyd, we've been a collective ever since. We organize around the use of design justice as a tool, a movement, and a way of thinking that advances the radical efforts of racial, social, and cultural reparations through the process and outcomes of design. So, organizing is motivated by the understanding that we must reverse the harms, oppression, and the vitriolic violence that our profession has contributed across communities. DAP organizers share the understanding of the policies, processes, and practices and pedagogies by which we plan, design, and develop cities are rooted in the racism that cause issues such as redlining practices and the dispossession of lands of the indigenous. A protest is a disruption meant to enact change. The tactics have historically been implemented in order to enact one of a few things. But they all sort of differ within each context. Ultimately, we all strive to build tension that's great enough in order to garner the necessities of change. From policy to the popular to the sensible to acceptable, radical, and then even unthinkable, protests can go from one Overton window to the next, and thus are assured to create friction within the existing systems in which they operate. The means of the protest ends are usually achieved through one of a few tactics. They either overload the system, they either starve the system, or they mutate the system. What you're seeing right now is an installation which was created by Designers Protest, kind of archiving the many issues which we feel aligned with. And this was one of our tactile pieces. But we'll be talking about many of the different projects which Designers Protest investigates, along with many of the things which we feel very strongly about in this presentation. So now I'll pass it over to Sophie.
Thanks, Victor. Hi, everyone. So what is the relationship between architecture and organizing? And what does organizing have to do with protesting? An effective protest is a well-organized protest, and organizing itself can take on many forms. So in DAP, we are design justice practitioners. We've challenged the privilege and power structures that use architecture and design as tools of oppression. We do this work, we are BIPOC planners, landscape architects, graphic designers, architects, and farmers that think critically about the built environment and hold complicit organizations, schools, firms, and legislative bodies accountable. We do this work in relation to our DAP kin, Dark Matter University, the Black Reconstruction Collective, Failed Architecture, Design Justice Network, and so many others. This is us, some of us. We are primarily based in the US and Canada with around 35 DAP core organizers, a network of around 200 organizers, and 8,000 social media followers we also consider part of our community. We have supporters across the US, Canada, and many other countries, and come from pretty much everywhere as well, and continue to grow every day. I'll pass it over to Simone.
One of the earliest actions that DAP took on collectively was to imagine and put down on paper concrete ways that the design industry moves towards racial justice. We've been asking individuals, firms, and institutions to sign on to the 9 design justice demands, and force the profession to make specific commitments and develop accountability for their actions. These 9 design justice demands were originally shared on the first DAP national call in June of 2020, and in early 2021, the demands were revisited and revised by the collective. We're now in the process of co-creating 3 additional climate-related demands that are not yet public. These are the demands. Divest and reallocate police funding, cease the implementation of hostile architecture and landscapes, abolish and cease the design of carceral spaces, restructure the relationship between power, capital, and our labor, center community leadership in design and planning processes, protect, create, and reclaim public space through liberatory planning and policy, cultivate anti-racist visions for affordable housing in just neighborhoods, preserve and invest in BIPOC cultural spaces, and create anti-racist models of design, education, training, and licensing. We recognize the power that design professionals and students have within their communities, political structures, and their clients. These demands explore the opportunities that we have as design professionals to act in solidarity with Black lives and create meaningful change in the built environment. There are many meaningful and practical paths that each of you could take to further investigate design justice, so we're about to provide you with a brief overview of our own journeys from being architecture students to organizing with Designs Protest. So I'm Simone. I'm a Black loyalist from McMaughy, also known as New Brunswick, and I currently live in Chien, also known as Oakland, California. I'm actually a Waterloo Architecture alumnus from the undergraduate program and former coordinator of Treelands Global Stories, a student-led initiative for curricular diversification and justice and design education, and I'm a former member of the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Task Force. And in 2020, I joined DAP after a pretty rough 8-month call in New York during the peak pandemic, where I sort of witnessed how high-profile design firms can abuse their power and perpetuate injustice, specifically racial injustice in their spatial practice. And I was also co-organizing an event called Breaking Foundations, which was a cross-institutional roundtable on equity and justice in design education. So I felt a true urgency to resist the capitalist, colonialist frameworks of our design practices and education, and to connect with other students organizing in their respective institutions. But that also became, a sort of community in a design world that felt very isolating.
I'm Sophie. I'm originally from Catawba land, which is known as North Carolina, and live on Massachusetts land in the United States as Cambridge, or Wisconsin. I was formerly trained in architecture at Rhode Island School of Design, and I'm a current student at Harvard Graduate School of Design. And while I was a student in undergrad, I cut my teeth organizing at RISD for transparency, greater faculty diversity, and increased student funding. I pushed for more radical and caring pedagogy, and went from being a student to a TA to a teaching fellow, and believe that design school is ripe for radicalization. After graduation in 2020 from RISD, I was looking for the education that I didn't get in school. So I found the DAP National Call on Instagram and immediately joined that summer. And this graphic was the first one that I answered. I filled out the form, and then the photo is from our retreat, I think this year we had in January. So as not an architecture student anymore, but now a landscape architecture and urban planning student, my work in DAP and in my master's program are in constant dialogue. I'm working on an abolitionist research project that ties directly to DAP demand number 3, calling out Harvard for its complicity in the prison industrial complex. And another collaborative project with the Manu Gorgi of Just practice is called Soft Cities, and it explores touch. Tells the story of the past, present, and future of Boston neighborhoods and their ecological resilience, and it's really soft. Storytelling and communication are a huge part of design justice, and something I work on in DAP through designing the website and facilitating DAP workshops like the one we're about to do.
Alright, so Victor, Victor Nashman, an architectural designer, organizer, and educator based in Toronto. And I graduated from Waterloo after finishing my Master's of Architecture program, where I investigated the role of monumentality in the post-colonial landscape in Belgium. What was interesting between the bridge between what Sophie mentioned and what I'm about to talk about is that while Sophie imagined prisons as farcical spaces, I was kind of looking at the exhibitionary complex, museums, and spaces of confinement, which we look at as podiums, as places of carceral experiences as well. I joined DAP in 2021 during the pandemic, driven by the desire to build a community long after academia and to inspire change within the built environment. I wasn't just interested in the idea of justice, but I was interested in the practice of justice. After I joined DAP, I learned about Dark Matter University, which stemmed from one of the DAP demands which Simone had previously spoken about, and I co-led the 2022 national campaign, where I led the call to action where we advocated for more stringent laws, talking about gun rights within the United States. And the call to action was essentially made in order to hold our institutions accountable in the ways in which they lobby the government. And so we took a look at the AIA, for example, and the ways in which its funds were being used, and asked the participants to quote-unquote follow the money. And so the final diagram that you're kind of seeing on this slide here is just a representation of some of the symbols that we use in order to sort of remind people the 5 steps we want them to take. We asked them to bring back this information, and then we would then sort of develop a campaign around that. What you're seeing in the center are the weekly roundups, which were essentially a collection of many different types of presentations, workshops, and also job opportunities that also align with some of our demands. One of the projects which I've been supporting is entitled Healing Hostile Architecture. And it's essentially a mutual proposal which is directed at addressing the many different forms of hostile architecture. So what is hostile architecture first? It's a form of design aimed at preventing or defeating crime and maintaining order. The strategy uses the built environment to discourage perceived troublemakers or unwanted individuals from using public spaces for activities that they were not deemed or intended for. It's an accepted and unquestioned means of security within the design profession. Hostile architecture takes form in many ways, from individual site elements like street spikes and segmented benches, to a lack of seating and green spaces, to destructive infrastructure projects like pipelines, and even the highways, which we all sort of grow to hate. That are usually cited within black and brown neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods are often noted as sacrifice zones. And so within the context of this project specifically, we're going to present the research findings and engage in pieces of storytelling, and then propose a new public policy to cease the use of hostile architecture and to center the houseless and the formerly houseless in an equitable and collaborative engagement process to create new design models of public space that are truly inclusive, nurturing, and have positive impacts for us all. So that is consisting of many teams that inform and work with one another to carry out the actions and campaigns centered around our 9 but growing 12 design justice demands, as you can see at the center of this diagram. We've got DAP Studio, data and research, youth organizing, planning and policy, academic organizing, direct action, rapid response, coordination, and care. I think that as somebody coming out of architecture school, what would be most relevant is academic organizing, and that's actually what we're going to be investigating in our workshop today. but we definitely want to say that there's a means of going from a student to an organizer outside of it and carry on that information and that linkage. So the Anti-Racist Design Justice Index is a tool for architects, designers, and planners which are committed to taking action towards identifying and dismantling systemic racism within our practices, organizations, and also institutions. What you're seeing right now is kind of like a workflow diagram in the ways in which we operate. And in creating this index, which you're also going to see within the newspaper which we brought, we just wanted to show you some of that work happening in the background. So the ARPJI is a tool based off of two axes looking at direction and action. And these two axes work together to help us map the level of anti-racism within each institution and also within each action that one is taking on. And so the goal is to get to liberation, and this tool aims to grow and adapt with us as we grow in our efforts of anti-racism. The index has been converted into an online resource for you to use. It's on our website, which you can find at collective.com/index. And so this graphic is actually just kind of allowing you to flip through some of the things that are on the website. The online version of the index is about like accordion, so remember to click on different focus areas in order to be able to see the full section. And to summarize in the words of a very own Ryan Jr., design justice demands are specific and multi-layered campaigns that are simultaneously put forth to gather gaps, collective actions, and also the actions of those outside of that. The index sorts and identifies the smaller cumulative actions in an interactive format that seeks to help people gradually redirect and challenge their individual practices, collective organizations, local governments, and educational institutions towards anti-racist goals, voiced by the demands which we created.
So this is the Anti-Racist Design Justice Index newspaper. It's a resource to help folks utilize the index within their spaces. And a brief overview of what this is, it started off as a request to create an infographic of the index, but now it's a 16-page oversized broadsheet with over 34,000 words, authored by countless contributors from within the collective and led by a swift and nimble newspaper team that worked with every facet of the organization. We've also brought some if you'd like to take a look at a physical copy. And so it starts with Brian Lee Jr.'s article, America's Cities Were Designed to Oppress, and then it presents a deep dive of DAP's organizing timeline, provides resources from the Anti-Racism Design Resources doc. It outlines case studies to see examples in action, and it offers how-to guides, and of course, a deep dive into the index itself with guiding questions and much more. And within the newspaper, there is an academic organizing section, and there's a series of best strategies that are outlined. So we'll provide a brief overview today in the presentation, as well as a more detailed reference document within a zine that we've created for students here at Waterloo to reference. First is build solidarity between institutions. We require large-scale change and accountability. Building solidarity allows for momentum to be sustained, guidance, leadership, and data to be shared, and the creation of a support system where folks can collectively learn and grow. Leverage and support from your allies and networks. There are larger networks of students and passionate alumni who have already created an impact in both in sharing ideas and maintaining energy. Building allyships with local and national BIPOC groups in both design and non-design organizing spaces is important. External networks from firms, organizations, alumni, companies, and other institutions and their connections can help you push institutions towards change. Most importantly, they're the people that you can learn a lot from. There's tons of great work that's already going on in your communities where you can plug in, and also to stress again, there's a whole network right here within Design as Protest you could tap into. Organize and strategize plans of action collectively. You can form your own collective, internally or externally from the institution, to create strategic plans and goals to work towards. Breaking down actions into categories could be effective. It can help folks doing the work see what can be done without the administration's support and make things slightly less overwhelming. It's also helpful to provide multiple ways for people to jump in and to support and divide up tasks in a way that allows people to hop in based on their capacities. and uplift ongoing opportunities for learning and education. There are many interesting events, trainings, webinars, and discussions being held by a number of wonderful anti-racist organizations and individuals. Redirect people to these spaces and opportunities because you don't have to be the sole provider of spaces for unlearning. Build responses to navigate organizing and build institutional memory. With lack of guidance and support from academic institutions and keeping in mind that the faculty and administration themselves won't necessarily have the answers or know how to change, creating how-to guides with actionable items specific to your institutions is a resource for students to navigate their schools. It's also a good way to support the work continuing as students graduate, and a how-to guide will be available in the zines as well. Finally, remember that you have agency in the spaces you occupy. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. In your student organizations, shape events to create spaces for learning more about design justice, the communities you occupy, and how to organize. Take personal growth time to go to a creative reaction lab seminar, do bystander intervention training, or even start a book club. You could also ask to listen into local community board meetings.
So here are some challenges you might or are going to encounter when organizing for change. Unacknowledged limitations to alternative pathways. What is demanded in architecture schools and licensure leaves little room for students to advocate for design justice and social change. This is one of the reasons why academic systems and pedagogy is so restrictive, leaving students with few leverage points and the burden of burnout. Another challenge are institutional barriers. Academic institutions are tied to state and private donors. These can lead to academic organizing in cycles where nothing that has been demanded can be met, as the institution itself cannot or wishes not to change. Since institutions reflect the oppressive systems they were created in, they do not see an issue with the status quo, as they still benefit and profit off of it. Limitations of a service-based industry. The profession of architecture itself is built on systems that limit design. Our work is so often limited to what clients will fund, and schools limit pedagogy to what skills firms will hire. The cycle will not stop if there is no change, pressure, or action done at local and national levels, and that change can start by and with students.
Alright, most importantly, don't forget to take care of yourself when you're doing these things.
Here are some strategies. We're essentially going to share with you some of the tactics that we use to take care of ourselves and those around us. The first thing we want to do is we want to keep things anonymous when we can and where it's applicable. Sharing experiences or correspondences anonymously online can allow students to be less vulnerable to retaliation and build solidarity without focusing on associated individuals. You can ask for external help outside of institutions, so you can reach out to larger organizations doing design justice work to facilitate or co-organize workshops to brainstorm anti-racist design pedagogies in academic institutions. You can set boundaries, and remember that we can always say no. So students have been dealing with a lot of exhaustion, are spread thin due to understaffed and unresponsive administrators and peers that ask more of their students, which includes having them take on responsibility, carrying out actions, but it's not necessarily always the students' jobs to do this, and it's not necessarily sustainable, especially without receiving compensation. You don't have to respond to every ask, and boundaries can be set by explicitly providing demands that address power dynamics that exist between students and those in power. And one tool which we're using within the Healing Hostile Architecture campaign is the use of an MOU, which can come before the creation of a contract. And an MOU is basically just a memorandum of understanding, and it's meant to sort of build trust and get a more even playing field between both end users. And what I think is useful in using this tool is that as student organizers, you can sort of set some sort of expectations between yourselves and also your staff before you implement anything that's deemed practical. Remember not to bear all responsibility for change by yourself. We can't take on the entire pressure of changing our schools and departments alone, especially as Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian people. It's not really our responsibilities to carry all the weight alone. Taking up space is an act of resistance itself. When you are a minority, your first responsibility is to yourself. Take care of yourself and get through school. Most important, get 8 hours of sleep every night. No, really. Like I'm not kidding. So, our community agreements, we collectively agreed to these agreements as we organize within the spaces in DAB, and we hold them in our head as we go through this workshop. The one thing that I will say is that we're hoping to use some of the data from the workshop in order to inform you on how to organize better. So we're just feeding back to you. We're creating feedback loops that we're hoping will be useful for you. So some of the agreements that we have within DAP are to acknowledge privilege and harm, to move up the speed of trust, to co-opt and not co-opt, to have a growth mindset. What is said in here stays in here. We respect the mic. We practice collective self-care. We look to non-hierarchical relationships, and we have a bias towards action. And then lastly, we've created a zine for you, which is just a small sort of informal magazine that's supposed to help you sort of collect all the information we've given you today. And we're hoping that you're going to use these in your workshop as we help you mobilize yourselves as we do a model campaign with you. We're going to be deconstructing one of the tools that we've created as DEF. We're going to reverse engineer it, and then hopefully you will choose based on issues that you feel are relevant to the school, what kind of campaign you'd like to mobilize. 2021, your school had held a What Matters charrette, where the school basically wanted to know what was in the students' best interest. And we're hoping that this year you can sort of ask yourself that question again and just ask yourself what really matters to you right now, whether you're a first-year student, just going to day 2 of school, having not drafted anything yet, I hope. Right? Anyways. Or whether you're a master's student, having all begun the entire process. So we're hoping that this workshop is going to be really useful and is going to help you jumpstart your campaign organizing so that you can either revitalize some of the student groups that are existing right now, or perhaps create your own in the future, and then also know how to create actionable change. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a 5-minute break. I'm not sure what time it is right now, but we're going to go back to the loft. We've got 3 separate sections. And we'd love to see you up there. If you want to take a walk in the break, this is the time to do it.